What's an example of a tool you have now that you didn't have then?
Therapy.
Yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it. Yeah.
Staunch therapy.
My understanding is that you had sort of burnt out on doing a bunch of TV in a row, and you said, I don't want to do any more TV. And then, as often happens in this world, the right thing comes to you and changes your mind. What was it about this script that changed your mind?
A few things. One, first was definitely the writing by the amazing, masterful Peter Craig. I was already a fan of his work, and to know that he was making a transition into television was exciting. And I was also just like, wow, that's really cool that Peter is even thinking about that. And then Ridley Scott, of course, being attached to it. I was like, I cannot leave this life without ticking that box. So that's wonderful. And not only that, they were giving me a chance to be an executive producer, which I something I dreamt of and didn't know was something that would ever come to fruition, honestly. And so to get this show with that offer was great. And also the whole story was about Ray. Like every page had Ray on it. This story was moving because of Ray. And it gave me a chance to really step into the lead. So that was enough for me to be like, this all has the recipe to be something great.
All right. This one is Jerome. Oh, we got Jerome in the house. We got Jerome in the in your mouth. What's going on, Jerome? Hey, what the hell kind of babysitter are you, man? This is terrible. Right? I mean, look at this. The worst damn daycare I ever seen in my life.
When I was reading about this and doing some research, you said something along the lines of you were afraid to take Ray on. You were afraid to inhabit Ray. Where did that fear come from?
Well, I think that's how I knew that he was somebody that I had to do, right? Because the fear was coming from I believe the visibility of having a character go through all these things. Like to have this Black man have to confront dealing with addiction and recovery, dealing with being abandoned, dealing with, all kinds of vulnerability was something that was incredibly intriguing, but terrifying at the same time, because then that also meant that didn't really give me anywhere to hide, right? Like I had to be able to be as open and as vulnerable as I could to play the truth of what Ray needed me to play. And so that gave me a bit of pause. It was like, that's a lot to do every day. People forget that oftentimes when we're playing this trauma and we're doing this trauma, our body doesn't know that it's not real. And so you oftentimes are really taking home a lot of this grief and a lot of this, turmoil that your characters are going through. And it takes another set of muscles and skill to really like separate yourself from that. And I think if this was brought to me 5 years ago, I don't think I would have had the tools to absolutely be able to give Ray the shine he deserved. I think I would have confused his pain with my pain. I think I would have confused a lot of what he was going through with what I thought I was going through. But luckily it came when it did, in a place where I had done a lot of my own personal healing and my own personal work. And I had done, such an array of characters that felt like I had room for Ray,
Right.
because that's what it felt like Ray deserved. Ray felt like a character who is yearning to be nurtured and yearning to be cared for. And I felt like when he came into my life, I was able to give him that.
Can I say this part back to you just to make sure I understand it? Because I often hear actors talk about how they were like afraid of a role or the person scared them. But that's the first time I maybe really got what that can mean. It's that when you have to play someone who is going through tremendous amounts of grief or addiction or crime or sadness or it's a lot of internal work, right? It's a lot of, he's going through a lot internally, that the fear comes from when the cameras turn off, your body doesn't know the difference between fake acting sadness and real sadness, fake acting grief and real grief. So the fear is actually like, what is it going to do to my psyche and my brain and my body?
Yeah, because it all affects one another. It really does. And you meet Ray already carrying so much loss. And if that's where you start, if that's where we're starting, and then we keep going over episode after episode, adding more and more and more to that, It was like I just have to make sure that I'm in a place where I know the dichotomy. I have to know that there is Brian and there is Ray. I have to know that when they yell cut, like drop it, like make sure you leave it where
Right.
it is. Not so much where I detach from Ray, but at the same time, I had to find a place and space to feel safe for myself because like my body will absolutely think that I am running for my life, that I am in danger, that I am dealing with this loss. It's easy to confuse the two. So in saying that it scared me, which is always good, like usually if it scares you, especially if you're an actor, that means that it is pinging something and rejoice, right? There may be a place for you to lay this down, but at the same time, you have to be very aware of how to split yourself. I know that sounds crazy. Its own weird form of schizophrenia. In a
Is
way,
there
but, like,
is there a
you
tool?
have to find.
Can you give me an example of a? You mentioned tools. What's an example of a tool you have now that you didn't have then?
Therapy.
Yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it. Yeah.
Staunch therapy.
Yeah.
Therapy, like reminding yourself the joys of what it is that anchors you and makes you feel like you know what I mean? Like sometimes it was the Great British Bake Off. I'm like, all right, great, cool. People are making a sponge cake. They find the things that make you feel cemented in something that is other than the reality that your character may be going through. A big part that helped me, honestly, while filming this was the city of Philly. I have to be completely honest with you. Like being able to go out and be in the city and meet people or go on a bike ride or go to a really cool cafe and things like that. Because it's also interesting, the way that Ray is experiencing Philly is completely different than how Brian got to experience Philly. Like Brian was living in a really wonderful place and had really good peers and could go to these. Ray is running for his life in the streets of Philly. This is the place he was born and raised, and he just can't feel safe. And so I had to make sure that I always felt safe in this city.
Tell me if this question is too personal, and we can move on from it. But I know that you lost your dad.
It's too personal, Tom.
Okay, never mind. Let's talk a little bit about. I'm joking.
That's fine.
You lost your dad during filming of this, and I won't give any spoilers away, but Ray has a complicated relationship with his dad. It's a fraught relationship. I remember, my question is this. I remember I lost my dad when I started on radio, really like when I was 24, so it was about 13 years ago. And people would ask me, when you're playing at the time I was playing music on the air. So, when you're playing a song, I don't know, Cats in the Cradle, or, like a song about dads, do you feel that deeply? And I would say, no, it's sort of unexpected. Like I can't really predict when grief is going to hit me. So were there moments where when you were filming this role or can you name a moment that the grief came unexpectedly?
Yeah, I mean, there were several moments. It's so crazy how the universe works, especially with me, because it tends to reflect. How can I put this? It puts things in front of me that I can either confront or run away from, right? These are the choices: confront or, fight or flight.
Fight or flight, yeah.
But they happen at such crazy times. So for example, like there's a main episode 6, that is truly about Ray and his dad. And we should have filmed that episode like May, June, right? Like of 2023, May, June, it should have been done. But a strike happened in May. And so that shut all productions down, including ours. And we were out of production for about 7 months, And so right as we got the green light to come back, my father died. And the episode that we were supposed to start as soon as we came back was the episode about my father and Ray. My father also died on Thanksgiving, which is not lost on me. And I had to figure a lot of things out, like, because I knew what episode we were going back to, and I was like, okay, there's there's no way to explain it, truly. There's no way to explain it. It's no different than when my mother died when I was doing Atlanta, literally when we wrapped Atlanta, and then to go back and there's a whole episode about my mother. Like, that was not lost on me either.
Yeah, right.
So I was standing in it just being like, the universe, somebody's trying to tell me something, but Brian, you are in a completely different place in your life. These are the moments where the dichotomy works, right? Because you gotta, you gotta figure out which person you want to be and which person you want to show, because grief will do what grief is going to do. You don't have any control over it. So I bury my father. I do all of the ceremony of what I'm supposed to do to lay this man to rest. And the relationship between Ray and his dad is very much like the relationship between me and my dad. Like, truly, like it's on the page. And it's also the kind of relationship that Peter had with his father as well. And so I get back and, not to give anything away, but there's a lot of intense scenes. Ray is going through it. Like, Ray is he's brought to his knees, basically. And as I'm doing certain takes, writhing in pain, screaming, crying, my Ving Rhames is there. We yell cut, and I look up from the floor, like I'm on the floor and I'm covered in blood and whatever. And I forgot that when you do a production like this, there's set deck. So set deck requires you sometimes to send photos from your personal life. And so they want pictures of you as a baby, or they want pictures of you, from your childhood or formative points in your life. And all the pictures that I sent them were like me as a child, like 5 years old, 8 years old, standing in front of the house that I was born in, which is the same house that my father died in. And so I'm laying on the floor and I'm just looking up and I was like, oh, right. I was like, right. And so,
Right. You were like, right.
Yeah. Like I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, here it is. Also, it's so crazy. Just this, I couldn't have asked for a better crew and a better ensemble. I couldn't have asked for better people, because we were so close. Even during the strike, like when the strike happened, I made a choice to stay in Philly. I didn't go back home. I wanted to be here. Something in my soul just told me to be here, to stay, to not go. Because I didn't know when this strike was going to lift. I wanted to make sure I was on the ground for people if they needed anything. So I stayed in Philly. And so, those moments where they saw me, people would surround me with love. Like, people always had me. Like that, like from every single person, like our directors, the producers, the cast, the crew, everyone made sure I was okay. And like, look, you're right. We can't control grief, and grief is a process. It's something that you go through for the rest of your life. Like, you find a way around and around and through, but there's no way of just getting over anything when it deals with grief. It becomes less and less, but because you grow, but it's not something that. But it was really amazing because it gave me insight on how to help Ray, right? Because the whole thing is that Ray didn't have the tools. Ray didn't know. Ray has not figured out how to deal with loss at all. And all Ray has been dealing with is loss, the loss of his mother, the loss of his girlfriend, the loss of his freedom, and that's just been his journey. And I felt that way. I was like, I lost my mother. I've buried my best friends. Now I'm burying my dad. Like, what does this all mean? On top of like, I'm successful at the same time and I feel alone. Like, all these things. There were just so many things that were parallel to what I was dealing with. But I was able to use it, and I think in a very healthy way. I wasn't putting myself through the ringer in a way, but I knew that if I showcased it in a way that felt truthful, maybe somebody else who was going through it, including myself, could find solace in it and could find like some kind of salvation in it, and just be like, you know what? There is another side. There is a way over. There is a way to release. And that is a big thing of what Ray represents to me. He was a place of release. Like, not to give anything else away, but my final line in this entire series is hallelujah. It's the last thing I say. And I love that because it's like, yeah, he finally gave himself some grace. He finally found some kind of grace and some kind of release. And that's what I found myself, Brian, going through, because I was going through, my own grief while filming this. So, but it was in a much
Yeah.
healthier place. It felt grounded.
I tell you what I find. I appreciate you sharing that story, and I tell you
Yeah.
what I find interesting about it is that now this was a long time ago and a million press cycles ago for you, but you and I spoke once before when you were doing Atlanta, and I remember one of the things that we talked about was that Alfred or Paperboy is his name in the is his stage name in the show, the character you played. You and I talked about how you could, similar to you were talking about your own experience with ambition, like ambition as an actor, as an artist, and how the role came to you and seemed to clarify some of your life for you in that moment. Similar to what you were talking to me about just then with Grief and with Ray. What's your earliest memory of acting? Because I know you've been acting since you were very young. What's your earliest memory of acting giving you insight into your life?
Uh, what I thought, what people call acting, I didn't know was acting.
What do you mean?
When I was young, it was just me escaping, right? Like, if you have my family tell you, like, because I was in a house full of adults, so there wasn't a lot of time for me. There wasn't a lot of attention paid to me because these adults had to adult. And so I found myself doing a lot of things to entertain myself. I wanted to feel what it was like to be other, or feel like what it was like to not be me. Like I just wanted to add another layer of what that was. It just seemed. And then, I used to do different things. Like when I was in first grade, like I read at a pretty advanced level. Like I learned how to read at the age of 3. So I was reading all different kinds of things. When I was in first grade, I have this really like memorable moment of like my class used to ask me to read stories to them. Because when I would read stories, I, read them very clearly. I always animated each character, like how parents do at bedtime. That was something that I never really got either. So I would reenact the things that I kind of yearned for and wanted. And so I would literally every afternoon be called up to the front of the class before we all had to go to our buses. And I would read stories from where the sidewalk ends, and I would animate them. There would be requests, people would raise their hands for other, and I loved it. I was like, cool, like, because it was something that I wasn't receiving at home, that kind of acknowledgement, like, because like I said, they're a house full of adults. And so it felt like a kind of glory for me to know that people, outside of my home saw potential of what I could do. And that gave me space to be unafraid to do things. But like my very first play that I ever was in preschool, man. And like I remember I got the part of Santa Claus, not even knowing how big a deal that was. Like that's why you come to the preschool play, because Santa Claus is gonna come out.
Yeah.
And I rehearsed and I rehearsed, and I remember all the parents are in the audience with their cameras out and taking it, and here's my big moment to come on stage. I was like, I don't remember my line. What's my line? So I pulled my beard down and I whispered to my teacher, and I was like, what's my line? And you see this woman frustratingly go, Merry Christmas, Brian. Merry Christmas. And the audience just rolling like and I just pulled the beard and was like, Merry Christmas. It was fun. Like it was escapism. I just was very unafraid. I was able to be very unafraid.
Okay. I'm glad you said unafraid, because I have a question on that too. Is that so? I mean, let's skip ahead a little bit. You end up going to Yale for drama school. You end up doing Shakespeare with the Public Theater, and then you get cast in the Book of Mormon, which was a massive Broadway production at that time. After 3 years in the Book of Mormon, well, actually, hold on. Let me just go to the Book of Mormon briefly. How did you feel? I feel like when I talk to, this is what I'm curious about. When I talk to actors who play rooms the same size, not on Broadway, they never seem as nervous as they do when they play those rooms the same size when they're on Broadway. So can you tell me how you felt right before you walked on stage for your first night?
Yeah, why am I here? I was like, it was very interesting because I am a theater body, right? Like I love theater, but musical theater is a completely different thing. It's a completely different muscle, it's a completely different mindset, it's a completely different beast. And every day I was just like, I don't know how much longer I have here. Like, I was an ensemble member. I started as an ensemble member. And we collaborated very deeply with Trey and Matt on it. Like we knew we had something special. I was a fan of Trey and Matt's, and I wasn't going to let just because it was a musical stop me from working with Trey and Matt. And, you know, at some point I got in a little too deep because like I ended up going from ensemble to lead, which is rare. That does not happen where you have a Broadway show that opens and then you turn an ensemble member into a lead cast member. That didn't happen. But, you know, I knew my reactions from the audience and how people were relating to my character. I just knew I wasn't an ensemble. I had a feeling I wasn't. And so Equity came and saw it. And on my birthday, you know, like they made me a lead. What I didn't know is that when you're a lead on Broadway, your minimum is a year. Like you have to do a year. I called it a bid. I was like, damn, I got to do my bid. Like I was like, got to do a year. And that, I'm really grateful for that because it challenged me in a way to really fight for how I wanted to be seen, but also to know when to walk away. It clearly didn't happen very quickly because I stayed for 3 years. But I just remember knowing that this wasn't where I, for lack of a better word, belonged. It just wasn't feeding me the same way. It fed me financially because I got to experience what theater felt like to actually make real money. You know, it was a phenomenon in a way. It really helped me understand how to deal with fame and exposure once I broke into television, for sure. But it just didn't feel right to me. I didn't feel like I fit it. And so when I walked away, I walked away very happy, you know, very, very much like I did what I had to do. And I think about this all the time. If I had walked away a year or 2 years earlier, I might have missed the opportunity of Atlanta.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Atlanta could have happened years before, but it didn't. It happened right as I walked away. And so that's another instance of the universe, right? Like just going with your heart and going with the universe. Because when I left the Book of Mormon, I knew I was like, I have to go for it incredibly hard. Like, and if I have to walk away from this, I'll walk away from it. I remember having that conversation with myself. I was like, if this is meant to be, then I will really go for it. But I deserve to give myself a fighting shot. But if me giving myself a fighting shot and going for it as hard as I can doesn't bring any results, then we'll figure something else out. But you at least have to try. You have to at least see. And right after, I mean, I'd say a little under a year, I was presented with an audition for Atlanta, and the rest is history.
After, I mean, Atlanta for people who haven't seen it yet is one of the most critically acclaimed shows of the last decade. I remember first seeing it and being really blown away by you in it. Was there a moment after Atlanta, or like after Atlanta took off, was there a moment, maybe it was a phone call, a meeting, or an audition, where you realize, oh, things are different now?
It took a minute. With Atlanta, it was interesting because it was another instance of something very rare, because we got the green light to make a pilot. And I don't know if you know, but usually just because you make a pilot doesn't mean that they give you a season of anything. Like usually a pilot happens and then maybe, but we shot this pilot and pretty quickly it was picked up to series. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. Like, like it's really happening. And I remember, like, it's so amazing because I remember every single moment of filming Atlanta with the crew. Like I remember every single moment. And sometimes when you're standing in something, you don't really know. Like even when I was standing in Book of Mormon, I was like, I know we got something, but you don't really know how you don't really know. But if you believe in it, then great, right? But you don't really know. But of course, at some point you feel the tingle. You're like, something's brewing, like something's going on. And the way I knew that the most with Atlanta is how much we got along, like how much we played, how able we were to be free with each other, play with each other, do what we did. I just remember everything so fondly about how we all came together. And what it also makes it even better when you don't care how people feel about it. At the end of the day, I was like, we are telling the stories we want to tell. I don't know who this is going to reach, but we're going to do it. I know how much I love Alfred. I know how much I want to imbue Alfred with who I am. And maybe people will catch it, maybe they won't. And then you go on. So, it was interesting because like after the first season, we had a break. Like there was like a year hiatus.
Yeah, I remember.
And I remember doing that and was like, well, I want to go back to theater then. You know, if we're going to take this break, I'm going to go back and do the things that I really want to experience. And then I went back to Broadway doing a play
And
the
were
way
the
I
doors
wanted.
a bit more open to you then because you had done that?
Oh, no, I still had to audition. No, because nobody had really, Atlanta hadn't taken that. I mean, yeah, it was doing fine, but like people still didn't really know who I was. People thought that they found somebody off the streets of Atlanta and made them and put them in the show. People didn't realize that I was an actor like that I, so I still had to do what I had to do, like, and so I go and audition for this play and I get to do a Broadway play and then I get a Tony nomination out of my first Broadway play. And I'm like, well, what is, so, and at some point I had to stand and look at myself and be like, fool, it's you. Like, it must be something you're bringing to the recipe. Like, how long are you going to act like it's not you that is contributing to this thing? Like, all the things that you have been a part of have done these great things. So when are you going to start pouring that stuff into yourself? That was what took the longest, you know what I mean? Because for some reason I started thinking, I was like, oh, it's just happenstance. Like this has become great because of happenstance. Like I just happen to be there when it happens. No, you idiot. Like it's happening because you are a part of it. And so that is something that I had to really teach myself. And I still teach myself that to this day. To this day, I still have to do it, especially as my co-stars become bigger and bigger, and I'm dealing with bigger projects and bigger roles. Like I have to remind myself that you are a part of the recipe, if not the recipe. You have to remember that. And it also helps me stay humble and stay anchored in the reason why I did it to begin with, because I'm not a fluke. My
Yeah,
creation is not a
that's
fluke, and
powerful.
what I
Yeah.
do is not a fluke. So it's like you have to remind yourself these things quite often because we are in a society that tells you that you don't belong and that you shouldn't be, like I still do projects where God, I still do projects where I have to do a lot of cultural dramaturgy all the time. Like, I have to make sure that people know that there's a way, there's not one way for me to exist in this world. There's not one way that I can identify. There's not one way. Like, that's why I like my resume. I'd like to bend people's elasticity in their minds and imagination of who I can be. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not necessarily their fault. They don't really have a lot to refer to, but I'm not going to sit down and allow that to happen and be put upon me just because you don't know about it and didn't know it existed. I'll show you. I'd rather show you. So, yeah, I owe a lot of gratitude to all these projects and all the spaces that I feel like I didn't fit. But I have to remind myself that I contribute to the greatness of all the things I've been a part of.
That's
They've been successful because I've been a part of them, and I have to remember that.
once you can start telling yourself that, once you can start putting your hand in your chest and telling yourself that, your life gets a lot richer. I'm getting
You live a
I'm
lot longer too.
I think so
Yeah.
too. Yeah, you're a lot nicer to people. I'm getting the wrap, but I told I can ask you one more question, so I'll make it a short one because I know you have a long press day.
Okay.
I'm struck by this thing you said earlier, the idea that there were things about Ray that I related to and it was helpful to me, and there were things about Ray that I related to and they weren't helpful to me. We can make this as long or short as you want. What's one thing you worked through while playing this character that you learned or gained from Ray, and what's one thing you're going to leave with him?
I can answer both of those at the same time. That I'm not an inconvenience, right? Me and Peter gave Ray this kind of moniker that he feels like he's an inconvenient child, and we came up with that when you look at like Ray, where Ray lives, right? So Ray has this room that's in an attic, not a bedroom that's in the house, not a bedroom that is in the attic, you know. And there's relics up there, posters from the early 2000s, 99, 2000s, like old clothes that don't fit, clothes of other people, memories that, and you usually put things in the attic that are an inconvenience. This is where storage happens. You get it out of the way, you put it up there. And Ray is moving through this series, always feeling like he's an inconvenient child. And Brian, felt like that for a long time. I was passed back and forth between parents. I didn't have a lot of people coming to my plays. I didn't have people coming to support me, yada, 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 yada. And so what being an inconvenient child often does is it forces you to kind of like shrink and fit spaces that other people have made for themselves. And you're always trying to find a way to fit into those places. And that's not living. It's really not living. It also causes you to feel very alone, like very, very alone. And I knew when I stepped into Ray, I was not that man. I was not that man anymore. I was not the man that felt that anymore. I was not that man that was going to shrink himself to make other people feel better about themselves or make people feel anything. I wasn't going to shrink. And so that is something I definitely walked away from doing Dope Thief, because here I am the lead, here I am the executive producer, here I am, you know. And so I have Ray to thank for quite a lot, like, for quite a lot. And all the male characters that I've played have given me an opportunity to kind of expand myself, not kind of, to expand myself, to truly realize that I deserve to exist. They deserve to exist. And there's no way to deny them. There's no way to deny them, because you all know them. You all care about them. You all walk away a little bit changed too. And that, to me, is the testimony of why I do what I do.
I thank you so much for the time. I love talking to you.
Same, man. I appreciate it.